So we are now recording. So welcome to session 3 of book readings from the Undiscovered Country, How to Live in Your Own Heartland. And I'd like to introduce Larry Dillenbeck, my colleague. Larry and I have known each other for 25, 30 years now and have worked together on a variety of projects. And as many of you know, we have what we call creative collaboration calls on a regular basis where we talk about our lives and what we're up to and come up with things we might want to share with the world. And then we have what we call webversations, because we bring some idea and we don't believe we have the answers necessarily. We want to hear what others have to say. And we've done this on a variety of topics and they've been a great joy and pleasure. And Larry has a very interesting background himself. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Larry, to introduce yourself and take it from here.
Thanks, Nick. It's always an honor and pleasure. And Nick and I have similar backgrounds in terms of backgrounds in hypnotherapy and NLP, coaching, some shamanic studies, things like that. And we became fast friends back in the early 90s. We were both training for Anchor Point Associates in Salt Lake City. And since then, we've just, back then, one of the things that I really admired about Nick was his mastery of language, and not only the precision of the language, but the artistry with his poetry and things like that. And so I wanted to model you, Nick. And so I appreciate everything that you've taught and shared over the years. And of course, your books are amazing, and I'm a big fan of the books. And so I'm really excited and honored to join you in this, the third revealing of the book. And this is your 8th book, correct?
Actually, it's actually my 9th. I counted them out. I've been telling people 8, but I've even lost count. So yeah, it's my 9th book of poetry. Nice.
Yeah, and it's this particular book. I picked it up as soon as it was available and was reading through, and I really like the structure of the book. It has some really, it's a unique combination of poetry and prose, and it's also a workbook that includes, questions and tasks and writing prompts. And it's really, I think, very well structured. And you have it designed in these four quadrants, and you presenting them in a particular order with the quadrants. And so using it as a map, do you have a recommended order in which you would recommend exploring through the Undiscovered Country?
Yeah, in the book I lay it out in a certain order, but that order is not necessarily recommended. And the thing about this kind of a map, so a map, typically when we think of a map, we think of it as a description of a terrain or a territory. And you could say this point reflects this point, this mountain is this place in the real world. This map is a little bit different because it's really about kinds of questions that we ask ourselves and that we might be grappling with in our life. And so really there is no particular required order. In fact, I recommend finding out what you're grappling with or what you're struggling with, and it's likely to fit in one of those 4 questions. So this time around, we're looking at broadening our horizon. That's the 3rd quadrant in the book. But you actually might be starting out with that. Maybe you're dealing with some old habits or limiting beliefs or grappling with what's important to you. And if that's what you're struggling with, that's where you start. So the book is laid out with the 4 quadrants. The known inner world is the first one. The unknown inner world is the 2nd quadrant. The known outer world, which is the one we're doing today, is the 3rd quadrant. And the unknown outer world is the 4th quadrant. But in the real world, whatever one you're struggling with is the one I would suggest working in. Now, here's the interesting thing. When we begin to work in one area, it often means we have to strengthen or go to other areas. So if we're broadening our horizon, we may actually need to deepen our roots in life and deepen our roots of trust and faith that things will work out in order to let go and step forward into our future. Or we may be extending the reach of our heart, doing what we believe is our mission in the world. But to do that, we have to face our own kind of shadows and our own demons, and we have to open ourselves up. That would be the known inner world. So, where you go depends on what you're struggling with. And then following that path, sort of on that path, you begin to discover what else you need to do to support your journey in the full expression of that area. To me, it becomes like a spiral. We're always expanding or opening those areas up for our own growth and support and to be our best in the world.
Yeah, I really like the framework, and that kind of once you experience a little bit of all four quadrants, as you can go in any direction at any time. And so as I understand it, we're going to be exploring the known outer world today. Is that correct?
Yes, the known
And
outer world.
so I'm curious how the metaphor of broadening our horizon relates to navigating through life and using this map.
Yeah, actually, this idea kind of unfolded to me when I was in Australia. I was teaching in Australia. I was teaching in the afternoon. A colleague of mine was teaching in the morning. This was near Perth and Scarborough. And there's beautiful beaches in Australia. And every morning I would get up and walk on this white sand beach that went on forever, it seemed like. And I would look out at the ocean, and it was amazing to see the blue sky, the blue of the sky meet the blue of the ocean, almost like there was this endless horizon. And as I was walking every morning, I noticed this question formed in my mind. And the question was, is the horizon you envision for yourself big enough to hold your dreams? And at that time, I was teaching an NLP class, and we were just going into the area around beliefs. And it occurred to me that our horizon is the set of ideas and beliefs we've formed about the world. And if that horizon is too small, it doesn't matter how big you dream, because the horizon won't let you achieve it. We can't accomplish it because it's beyond what we have incorporated in ourselves as either possible or permissible or appropriate in the world. And in order for us to be able to live that dream, we're going to have to expand our horizon. And out of that came this poem. So as I was walking, first I got that question, is the horizon you envision for yourself big enough to hold your dreams? And then over the next couple of days, this poem formed, and here it is, I'm going to share it with you, called The Endless Horizon. Endless horizon. On a clear day, the ocean offers an endless horizon, an edge to the world beyond which you cannot see and has no perceivable destination. A mystery to ancient mariners who sailed the unknown sea in search of undiscovered lands, or seeking mythic treasures because the ocean edge is wide enough for all you might imagine. It speaks to that part of you that longs to know what's around the corner, what's over the hill, what's beyond the edge. That part of you that knows there is more to life than you have allowed yourself to live. If you squint and stretch your eyes to the farthest margin, as if to peer over the edge of your own horizon, you will begin to wonder what lies beyond the rim of possibility you have set for yourself. You will hear the tireless crash and roar of wave after wave, battering at your beach, crumbling belief into sand, dropping the shells of what no longer lives in you on the shore, and asking you over and over, is the horizon you envision for yourself big enough to hold your dreams? And your heart knows the answer. Your heart knows when the life you live won't let you live your life. Your heart knows when the tides of change come from the deep, deep sea, from the unknown depths in you that support an endless horizon. And then on one clear day, you will stand on the shore and see for yourself all things possible. And for me, this whole exploration in this third quadrant where we're exploring today, the known outer world, is the exploration of how we relate to the world and how we constrain the world in our own understanding, our own, again, set of beliefs and ideas about what's possible. And if we can begin to break that up a little bit, if we can begin to open that door, then I believe we as humans can do amazing things. And so that's the exploration in this area. is to begin to loosen up those old ideas and beliefs, to recognize that you have a limited time on the planet, that you will be passing out of this existence at some point along the way, and you don't know when that's going to happen. And so this is the time to get clear about what you're here to do. And then to really take the time to find out, well, what are the vows of the heart? What are those things that you are devoted to in a way that if you don't do them, there will be something missing or lacking in your life, that coming to the end of the days, you'll look back and say, why didn't I do that? And for me, it's like getting back in touch with that vow, those what I call the vows of the heart, the heartfelt promises or gifts that you have to bring to the world. And that's what this section is really all about.
Beautiful. Yeah, the Endless Horizons is absolutely one of my favorites. And I think I have an anchor to that poem. When I go on my long walks, and since I started reading the book, every time I see the horizon, it evokes pieces of that poem and that idea. So it's definitely one of my favorites. You know, for each section of the book, you identify different resources to help us navigate that terrain, to accomplish along the way. Would you talk a little bit more about how you use the term resources and the tasks, and how do they relate to each other in the map?
Yeah, so when I was exploring each of these quadrants and the kind of philosophical and poetic question that goes with them, then it encouraged me to explore, well, how can we proactively address those issues rather than just sort of fumbling around? So that's why it's a map. A map gives you a proactive way of walking a terrain. And it occurred to me that in order to really explore that area, there's a particular resource or a few resources that really serve as a powerful support in doing that. And so for this one, the third section, the known outer world, it's really about clarity and discernment. Our ability to really get clear about what's important to us, what we value, what we love, and to discern in the world when that's available to us, or what in the world will lead us to that, what gives us nourishment for the soul in that area. So it's really about the clarity about it and the discernment to find it in the world or in ourselves around us. So clarity and discernment are the resources to use in helping explore this. And then the tasks are really, again, the kind of the proactive steps you could take to enrich this area. So in this case, the tasks are: 1, untying the Gordian knot; 2, death as an advisor; and 3, living the vows of the heart. So following to what, on what I said earlier, it's those 3 tasks. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of go over each of the tasks a little bit, and then share one poem from each of those sections. So the book has the task, a few poems associated with that task, along with questions to answer and writing prompts for you to explore. But the Gordian knot, just a kind of quick survey here. How many of you have heard of a Gordian knot? And if you have, you can just put yes in the chat. Just put yes in the chat if you've heard of a Gordian knot. It's a very, very common term in the West. But, put yes in the chat. We've got at least one yes in there. Yes, but I can't place it now from Hope. Yeah, yes, yes. So several of you say yes. Actually, where that idea comes from is that in the ancient world, there was a town called Gordium, and the story goes that a impossible knot was tied around a wagon that was said in legend and myth that anybody who could untie this impossible knot would be the ruler of all of Asia. And Alexander the Great, we call him Alexander the Great, but in this modern era of our increasing sensitivities to conquerors and what they do to other people, maybe we wouldn't call him the Great now, or at least some cultures wouldn't call him the Great. But Alexander the Great, as he's called in the Western world, came upon this. He heard about this legend, and he spent like hours surveying it, trying to figure out how to untie it, and it was just incredibly complex. Nobody could do it, and the story goes, he pulled out his sword and just cut it. And then he went on to, quote, conquer Asia as the prophecy had predicted. So Gordian knot, the Gordian knot is that impossibly complex knot that it seems like we can't untie. And for me, that refers to this incredible set of ideas and beliefs that get kind of convoluted and intertwined and connected inside of us that becomes our familiar world. In other words, the world is familiar by what we've learned to see and hear and notice in the world, and by the ways that we hold the world as we go through our life. And that familiarity of our beliefs is more important sometimes than expanding ourselves or facing our reality, because even if it's painful, it's familiar. And if you let go of the familiar, then you enter this thing that most of us find incredible challenge with, and that's called the unknown. And if I were to say there's one theme behind the whole book, it is the theme that we are unknowable as human beings, and that the world is ultimately unknowable, and that the biggest challenge for us is being able to embrace the unknown and walk with courage and dignity through it as we live our lives as best we can. And so untying this Gordian knot is about really confronting our limiting beliefs in the world. And for this section, I want to share one poem, and then I'll open it up a little bit for questions or comments, and then I'll go into the other two sections. But the poem I want to share is called Foolish Notion. Foolish Notion. And a lot of times when I write a poem, I have no idea where it's going to go. I get an opening line, and then I just go from there. And that's the way this poem appeared to me. I had this opening line was part of my morning routine. In the morning, I get up and I set my intent for the day. And sometimes I set my intent about how I would like to feel when I'm going to sleep or just before I go to bed that night. And the line came up, it was, "Today I greet nightfall with a fearless grin and the foolish notion that love conquers all." So that was the kind of space that opened up from this intention setting idea. Today I greet nightfall with a fearless grin and the foolish notion that love conquers all. It is not actually true, of course, unless you set your desire for it and then use creative math to account for the ills of the world, especially in this trumped up era. In fact, it is downright delusional. But delusion is our greatest weapon for living long and prosperous lives. Otherwise, who among us would stand up to the stars? The earth spins on its axis, no matter how far ahead we cast our desire, and we will blow by the target in an instant every time, arms flailing wildly to grab it on the pass. So the best place to stake a claim is right at our feet, to make the moment the target and ride it like a stallion through our lives. Everything beyond that is fair game, fodder for loss and destruction, and there is no insurance to cover broken hearts, dashed hopes, and dead dreams. The next best thing is to greet nightfall with a fearless grin and the foolish notion that love conquers all. And actually, the research indicates that there's a big difference between people who tend towards pessimism in life and people who tend towards optimism. And the difference is that pessimistic people are actually more realistic about how things go in life. They're more realistic. But pessimistic people are also unhappier, they live shorter lives, they're less productive, and they're more stressed out. People who are optimistic tend to be more delusional about life, but they live longer lives, they're happier, they're more successful and more productive. And this idea of not only letting go of our limiting beliefs, but opening ourselves up to the belief in possibilities beyond what the world delivers. If you can believe in something beyond that the world has delivered to you, then you are stepping into the world of creation, the world where you can make things happen that are different than have happened in your life. And to me, that's the greatest gift of this work of untying the Gordian knot, is that we can open ourselves to the unknown, and the unknown is vaster than anything we've faced before. It has more possibility. So I think I'll just kind of open it up for any questions or comments at this point in time, and then we'll go on to the other two. Or Larry, if you have anything to say.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
Hi everybody. It sounds a little bit like you are in this particular poem, as if you are bordering on the realms of faith. Am I correct?
Well, you know, I would say yes, you are correct. And in fact, this part of it, this quadrant, the known outer world, is you could say on a diagonal from that, if you went down to the unknown inner world, the unknown inner world is about having trust in life. In fact, the resources for that are trust and faith. And I think these two are directly supportive of each other. In other words, if you try to expand your horizon, but you haven't deepened your trust in life, probably you're going to run into conflict. So yeah, I would say it's on that border about faith and about trust. But it's also the place where I think we can increase that faith or trust by examining the beliefs we have and our ideas and catching ourselves. You know, I'll tell you a little simple thing. I noticed that I had this cup of water. The cup is kind of has a wide mouth to it. And my cat was coming over and starting to stick her head into it to drink it. And I was like, no, 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 it's my water. Shunning the cat away. And then I realized, maybe the cat is giving me a message. And I thought, did I fill the cat's water bowl? And I got up and looked, and sure enough, the water bowl was empty. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Here the world is, I mean, in a way, here's something happening in the world, and I'm interpreting it in a certain way. That's my water, you know, you shouldn't have, rather than recognizing maybe the world is giving me a signal about something. You know, if the world's giving me a signal about something, then I have to have faith that there's a greater thing occurring. The cat wouldn't be coming over to get the water if it wasn't thirsty, and it didn't have another choice. You know, so it's doing what it needed to do. So I started looking at when the cat does things, what message is it giving me? So last night I was working at my computer, and probably I was over, you know, I started pushing myself beyond a good break time, and the cat came up and it's like going for my hand, putting its head under my hand to get me to scratch its head in a very determined way. And I thought, okay, well, maybe the cat's giving me a message that it's time to take a break. But I still wanted to finish up a few things, so I kept at it. And then the cat literally walked across the keyboard and hit the keyboard in a place where I had some music playing in the background, where the music stopped. And I thought, okay, so here's, you know, it's like, if we expand our horizons, what we can do then is we drop our predetermined interpretations of things. And then we can be in a position to say, well, what's life teaching me in this moment? What's the message here? And I think that's where you enter into another kind of relationship with the world, which is this trust with life that I think you're referring to. So when we expand our horizons, we almost have to do that other side of the equation. Thank you, beautiful question. And good to see you, Doreen. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I had trouble I couldn't figure out how to get on. I've been trying for the past 15 minutes, but I'm here now.
Yep, you got here and I'm happy you did.
Hope not to be late next time.
Okay, other comments or questions?
I have a question. It's Nadine here.
Hi, Nadine.
When we have to make a decision to change our path, does that limit our ability to broaden our horizons?
Well, I don't think it would by necessity. I think it would depend on the kind of choice you're making and what that choice serves. So if we're making the choice out of fear and out of a anxiety that we can't go on a path that might be actually appropriate for us, we choose to get off that path, then I think it's limiting us.
Okay.
But if we're choosing to go off our path because we're realizing there's a path with heart that we're being called to follow,
right,
then I think it's expanding.
Right. And I have another question, and I know this is a simple one, and I know Larry's going to laugh. Would you mind giving me the definition of what discernment means to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Discernment to me is the process of making distinctions um, that support, well, I'm going to use, I think discernment itself just means making distinctions between things. We
Okay.
discern one thing from another. So in a way, when we're discerning, we're marking out or framing some part of our world in a way to take that into account. So that's what discernment is it's separating something out from the rest. In my world, this discernment is about being able to discern what's important and what matters. And that's why I think discernment in this case, I use the word discernment because for me, it both has the intellectual, but I think it also implies a kind of heart. If we're really discerning, that discerning requires more than just an intellectual parsing of things. If we're intellectually parsing things for the purpose of just intellectually parsing, I think that's where we could get into analysis paralysis and sort of an analytic world that may not serve us. But if we're using our intellect with our heart, then I think we're discerning what can serve us to walk the path of heart, to walk the landscape of the soul, as I call it. So for me, I'm using discerning also to embody and actually to include the greater aspects of ourself than just the intellect.
Well, thank you, because I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page.
Well, hopefully we are. And if
Yeah,
not,
well, that's what poetry is, isn't it?
yeah,
Making sure you get on each other's page and understand.
I think poetry is really about opening the doorway to experience something as opposed to just get it intellectually.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the second task. So first task is untying that Gordian knot. And the second task is using death as an advisor. And for me, that's the recognition that our time span on the planet is limited. And because it's limited, we need to be more aware or more intentional in how we live. And for me, death has been an advisor throughout my life. In the 20s, I worked at a counseling service, crisis line, providing coaching for people who were either attempting or considering suicide. And our job was to help them work through that and stay on the planet, find a reason to live. And there were questions about death and dying on the wall. So I took them home and I answered them in my journal. But as I found as I was answering them, I just wasn't happy with the answers. And then one night at the crisis center, a caller actually died on the line. I was talking to him, and he left he went into a stupor. The phone was there, and at the time we had an arrangement with a phone company that they would track down somebody's location from the phone. This was before there were cell phones, and we could send a 911 call to their location. And so the phone was off the hook, and I stayed on the phone. I could hear the crew arriving and working on him, and then finally they said he's gone. And then somebody noticed the phone was there, and they dropped the phone on, and it kind of went dead. But so that night I came home and I was in a funk, and I was unhappy with the answers I had to these questions about death. And it went in my journal into a whole story about a conversation with death. And that conversation led death to give me a task or assignment. This was in 1977. The assignment was to explore the inner realm where my grave was, to find the land that graveyard was in and who ruled the land. And I started this story, this fiction story, exploring this landscape. And really that was, I think, the beginning of this idea of the undiscovered country. To me, the undiscovered country, the world within us, is very much a landscape. And so in my mind, I had this vivid image of being on my grave, across from death, given this assignment to go and explore this land outside of this graveyard where my grave is and who ruled that land. And I began that story in 1977 and have since gone on to write a few other stories that all start from this graveyard, and I go out and explore this undiscovered country. So it's a very rich metaphor for me. And death has been the advisor. Death is the advisor in all those stories. I've never published them, but very much have this sense of death as a guidepost and as a reminder of the preciousness of life. So The particular poem that I want to read from this section is called Tiny Griefs. Tiny Griefs. And how so often there are little things in life that we lose, we misplace them, or maybe we feel bad about, you know, some hurt that we inadvertently hurt somebody, or something that's happened to us. It's really about the little losses of both things in our world, but also our own chip at our own sort of self-worth or self-identity. At times we have to really examine ourselves more closely. Tiny griefs. Over and over, my silly heart fastens itself to falling things. The harsh word, the cracked screen, the missing book, the downcast eyes. Tiny griefs scattered all over the yard, each light as a feather and yet too heavy to haul away in a wheelbarrow. I used to catalog them, recording them on the page of my journal as if I could close them out or keep them under cover and then pack them up in a box I used to gather them up, believing they would lift me out of my life if I could only fashion them into wings. Now I leave them be, countless reminders of my fragility. I let them settle into me. Now, when my silly heart fastens itself to falling things, I let it fall, and it becomes a feeding ground for a swarm of sparrows. And I watch as they lift their wings to the sky. And I think we have this, in some respects, unfortunate idea that we need to resolve things in our life. That if we have some guilt or some grief, we need to solve it. And I think that sometimes is a limitation, because I think life is filled with mistakes and missteps and, you know, things we do that we regret. And to solve them, to tie them all up into a neat package, is to deny the very act of living. To me, that ability to sort of embrace even our mistakes and our missteps, that's part of the first quadrant in the book. That ability to widen our embrace of ourselves means that we recognize we are not perfect, that we make mistakes, and recognize that the things that we hold precious will pass out of our lives, will be taken away from us by life sometimes. And if we can hold a space where that doesn't have to be resolved, then we open ourselves to a broader experience of life. And for me, that's what Tiny Griefs is really about, is opening ourselves to the human act of letting go and letting be, of not having to fix or repair, not having to make it right all the time. And then I think when we operate from that place, we can walk with greater dignity into our future. So again, I can kind of open it up. Larry, if you want to make any comments, or if anybody else has questions or comments.
Yeah, Nick, I would like to share a little bit on this one. This one was particularly relevant for me because, you know, as you know, I lost my daughter in 2012. She was 18 and lost her in a car accident. And so since then, I really have considered death as an advisor, not only to, you know, not take things for granted in my daily life, but as you said, to allow those feelings to be. Because this last week on Tuesday it would have been her 26th birthday. And so all of those feelings came flooding through, and I just honored them, just let them be, let them come, let them be, let them go, because it's appropriate for a father to have those feelings who's lost a child.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel like I needed to fix them or correct them or change them. I just honored them, let them pass through, and it was done, and I feel clean.
That's beautiful.
So I don't have this like haunting residue from those feelings.
Yeah.
So that one is particularly relevant and meaningful to me.
Yeah. Well, that's not just a tiny grief. You know, so, you know, in whatever scale you put them on, that's probably not going to be on the tiny side, but the same principles apply. You know, I think for me, if you think of life as a process of learning, I think one of the things we're learning how to hold that space where, you know, even the worst things in our life can still have some gifts and some beauty in them, you know, and all the years that you had with Danny and all that she, you know, meant to you in your world is still present and still alive. You know? And have access to that through the grieving process, it reminds us of that. So, yeah, I've been touched. Larry shared that story with me, and it's I've always been very touched with how you have walked through that part of your own country with such dignity and grace in a way. So kudos to you. My
Thank you,
friend.
Nick. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Other questions or comments on this?
I'd like to say something, share. Nick, as you talk about that, I'm softly but powerfully struck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just there's such an air of humility thing to make space to sit with and just allow the tiny griefs. Had this image of, you know, uncounted paper cuts.
Oh,
You know?
yes, right.
Right? But to just sit with them and allow them to be, and you know, have total relaxation, hold them within a space and a state of total relaxation. So I think forward, who would I be? What would it be to walk forward that way?
Mm.
And I find someone with a cloak of deep humility.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Quite lovely, actually, to contemplate, I think.
Well, I think, you know, humility is the appropriate response to life. And, you know, even though we may sit in this space, ideally, and tears may come, and, you know, we might feel ourselves, you know, our whole spirit in that place of wondering why, you know, why. In fact, I interestingly enough, I got this inspiration to start learning about the life of St. Francis a few weeks ago. There's a learning, the teaching company has a course on St. Francis, and so I watched that, and then listened to that one, and then I I went and watched a couple of Netflix shows about St. Francis. One of them was about the city of Assisi during World War II and how they harbored a lot of Jews, and one of them was a Muslim poet and musician who put together a whole musical program called When Francis Meets Rumi, or When Rumi Meets Francis, one or the other. But it's, you know, about the Muslim and Christian worlds and how they can overlap, a bridge between them, you know, which is timely in this era. How are we going to build bridges between people? And then I watched the Franco Zeffirelli film, you know, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, and all of this is kind of exploring this man, St. Francis, who, you know, who had such humility in life. And I think that doorway into really accepting ourselves as fault, you know, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt people. We're going to be hurt. And to be in a space that's part of life, and to hold that space, I think allows us to be able to be more kind and more gentle, you know, to be more respectful. But people are doing the best they can for the most part. And even if they're doing something that, you know, is out of our understanding, they're still doing the best they can. Now, some behavior needs to stop, of course, and we need to prevent certain behavior in the world, but that doesn't mean we stop people from feeling their feelings, you know, and being able to use those feelings as messengers. And I think that's what grieving does. It really highlights that that these are things, you know, reminding us of what's precious to us and what we value and what we love. Reminding us that, you know, clinging to things doesn't always serve us. And in fact, sometimes it's exactly, you know, we need to do exactly opposite. Yeah, so thank you for that. The third task in the book is this idea of living the vows of the heart. And to me, you know, I love these poetic phrasings. Like I could say, you know, what kind of deeper mission or purpose are you trying to serve? Or what is, you know, what do you believe you're here to do on the planet? That's really goes into the fourth quadrant in this work, which is extending the reach of our heart. But it could start here in terms of What is the things that are precious to you that you believe you need to honor in life? You know, the vows of the heart, as I call them. And particularly, like, how do you hold your own word inside of you? You know, if you speak to yourself, what relationship do you have to your own word? Don Miguel Ruiz, the author of the 4 Agreements, has as one of those 4 agreements, be impeccable with your word. And I found that so much and so often in our modern world, we aren't that way. You know, we're not impeccable with our word. I know I've certainly missed the mark on that one many times in my life. So the poem I want to share is called Your Word to Yourself. Your word to yourself. If I had to live according to my word, not those spoken out for the ears of others, but the word within me, spoken only to myself, perhaps then I would come to love the silence of rocks, or the yielding of earth to the roots of trees. Perhaps then the darkness would be darker, wetness wetter. Perhaps then I would slip the bridal veil off of life for the deep, wedded kiss until death do us part. But undoing is like salmon swimming upstream. Not all make it. It's not enough to say, I'm going back to source, when what is required is a great leap. You know, I think sometimes, you know, we make promises to ourselves or we make comments to ourselves and then we run roughshod over ourselves and we don't do them and we get upset with ourselves. I know I've done that many, many times in my life. And now I'm starting to catch myself when I make comments and when I make promises to myself and noticing what's behind them, sort of tracking them down. Because I think ultimately we do have to make a great leap of faith that what we do in the world will have the kind of results that we want, the kind of outcome that we want. Larry was mentioning this whole, you know, kind of the use of words. And my feeling is that we've come to a point in our life where we're actually too cavalier with our words. We're too casual with our words. We're too easy with our words. And on the one hand, I think we need to be more cognizant of what we're saying in the world. And that's particularly heightened now in the current environment where people are recognizing the power of words and the impact that they can have on others. On the other hand, you know, we can't monitor ourselves for every single thing we say because we would then never talk. So it's like, where do we find that balance between expressing and being cognizant that our words have an impact? And I think that balance starts inside of us, really starting to track the words and comments that we're saying to ourselves. So if I had to live according to my word, not those spoken out for the ears of others, but the word within me, spoken only to myself, perhaps then I would come to love the silence of rocks, or the yielding of earth to the roots of trees. Perhaps then the darkness would be darker, wetness wetter. Perhaps then I would slip the bridal veil off of life for the deep, wedded kiss until death do us part. But undoing is like salmon swimming upstream. Not all make it. Not all words will make it. Not all our promises will be fulfilled or manifested in the world. But undoing is like swimming upstream. Not all make it. It's not enough to say, I'm going back to source, when what is required is a great leap. So when I write these letters to my future self, for instance, I'm making a great leap. I'm putting on the page a description of something I would love to manifest in the future. And I'm putting that out there in my own Evernote program on a time that's already dated that space in the future, as if it's hanging there in that place. And then when I arrive, I see what happened. You know, I notice, did the great leap that I made between those 2 points in time land me where my word wished me to be? And if it did, yes, celebrate it. If it didn't, that's no sign I'm bad or I've done something wrong. It's a sign that I'm learning how to forecast more and more clearly and more effectively. That's how I believe we develop intuition, is by making a guess about what will happen and knowing it's our guess and then noticing what happens. And if it's close, we say yes. And if it's off, we think, I wonder what I missed. What else could I have taken into account? And if you do that process, you make some idea, some guess about what's going to happen, and then you notice what does, and you compare the two as a learning or as a celebration, then I think you start to develop this incredible gift we called intuition or instinct. And again, that's the second quadrant, the roots in yourself, developing intuition and instinct. So you can see how each of these quadrants start to weave together. So again, I'll kind of open it up for questions and comments. We've got about 5 more minutes before we wrap up. So this is your chance to ask any particular questions or make comments.
I got a comment.
Great.
I just took a walk this morning with a couple of friends, and one of them's a scientist that deals with nature, and she is studying, all kinds of effects of what happens on the ground when the water stays there forever. It's called a bog, and or common parlance is it's a swamp. Well, I suddenly realized that my grandmother had done some work, 75 years ago on a swamp. So I decided, look into what swamp was it. And it turned out the swamp that she was studying, they created a trail around it because so many people came to look at it. And they named the trail for my grandmother. Okay, so then I thought, well, what can I do with this? So I looked into it, and it turned out there was all kinds of studies, about what's happening in this bog. It's right not far from New York City. And I guess my grandmother went there to study nature, but it turns out that bog is now been quoted by all kinds of people. So I want to thank the people that care about nature for not forgetting it and for keeping track of things like bogs that exist forever. They never go away unless there's a terrible catastrophe or something, or, a nuclear explosion or something, but they're always there. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Robin. And actually, Robin, to me, there are 2 invitations that come from that. One is the invitation you followed, which is your connection to that through your grandmother and where that led you. Beautiful kind of line that you followed there that's in your own roots and in your own kind of ideas about the world. What is a bog? And then there's the metaphor using the idea of the inner landscape, like the metaphor of a bog inside of us. And sometimes learning what a bog is like in the real world gives us you could say the tools or the directions or the steps we can take to work with our own inner bog. That part of us that might be there for long periods of time, but has, seemingly, might have come with challenges to walk across it. Like I went to the bogs in Ireland, and, they have some walkways over the bog, so you walk on these boards. But if you try to walk through it, man, it's mushy, you step into it, it's a challenge to walk through bogs. But there's all kinds of interesting things that happen in a bog. So for me, when something like that comes up, Robin, I say, go explore what bogs are all about, because there's a metaphor for your inner world there that can take you into rich, wonderful places. In addition to the connection.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to put bog Ireland, because I walked through some of the same ones you went to.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, other questions or comments? Got time for 1 or 2 more?
When this is Nadine again, I always laugh when people mention fish going downriver.
Uh-huh.
Even dead fish go downriver.
Yep, that's true. It doesn't take much to do that, does it?
No, it does not.
It's interesting, the metaphors we have in life, like go with the flow. And that's such a powerful metaphor for a lot of us, and reminds us that a lot of times life is, a greater, we're in a greater stream than our own little stream we're creating in our lives. And to go with the flow might be to go with a bigger stream in your life. But there are times when maybe it's not appropriate to go with the flow. You could say, if we continue to go with the flow in our current world, without addressing all the things that are coming out with the Black Lives Matter, with you know, the kind of questions that people are asking because of the pandemic, if we tried to go with the flow of life as it has been, which many people might do, it'd be easy to ignore those things, we're going to lose the opportunity. Right now, some people are bucking the stream, you know, the main flow of life, and that bucking the stream is exactly what we need to do. That's what's going to, you know, what does salmon do? They go upstream to spawn. What new world are we going to spawn?
Yes.
By bucking the stream now? And I think this is the time when we do it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. True. True. Yeah. So.
Okay, maybe one more question or comment, and then we'll wrap up. Or Larry, do you have any last words to say before we finish out here?
Just one thought on the, you know, when you were talking about the power of words, and I remember one of my original hypnotherapy trainings that we were given an exercise to treat your word as law for a day or a week or however long you think you could pull it off. And but just like, what would happen if you treated your word as law? In other words, if you spoke it, it would come true. And so it gave me a filter to look at my own language to go, you know, or even my internal dialogue language of like, if that, do I want that to come true? Is that something that I want to have happen? So I would catch myself, like if I said something about, oh, it sucks getting older, you know, do I really want that to happen? Well, I don't. so I reframe it and I rephrase it so that the language is aligned with what I want to have happen. And I really liked your exploration of that, because I think it's very, very powerful when you start examining your use of words.
Exactly, yeah. Or the words, you know, when we curse things. You know, I know I've had a habit in my life of cursing things sometimes. And then one day I realized, you know, like if I'm saying God damn something, you know, do I really want that? You know, do I want God to be spending his or her time doing that? Maybe there's another way of holding it or another way of framing it. And I think that's what the beauty of becoming attentive to our words is all about, is then we recognize we don't have to be describing things the way we have. We can open the door to new descriptions and new possibilities. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me this morning on the third session of the Undiscovered Country, How to Live in Your Own Heartland. And it's my deep wish that you use this as an invitation to explore your own world of what's important to you, your own beliefs, your own ideas, your own values, that you begin to untie your Gordian Knot, that you use death as an advisor and seek out those vows of the heart, the things you're devoted to, and make them a bigger part of your life. And Larry, as always, thank you so much for being here, for your support and friendship over the years, and for the great questions you ask.
Likewise, Nick, always a pleasure.
And thank you all for coming. We will be doing the last of these next Sunday at 9 a.m. So I truly hope you'll join me for that. And if you're interested and you haven't joined up yet, you can also join me for a writing prompt group, which is, I send out a writing prompt on Mondays, and then we meet on Fridays, those of you who wish to share what we've written. And maybe I'll quickly pop over, get the link for that, and I'll put it in the chat. It'll take me just a second to do that because I have to go back to another space in my computer and get that link. Almost there. There it is. So I'll just copy this link and put it in the chat. It'd be great if you could join me for that. You don't have to read. If you do want to come to the class, you can just come and listen to other people. There have been some really wonderful poems that people have shared. I've been really, really pleased with that group and the work we've done together. So there it, oops. I thought I copied it, but what I was giving you was a summer discount code to some day passes for my internet service. There it is. So there's the correct one. So yeah, if you'd join me for that, that would be great. And again, thank you all for coming. I appreciate your presence, your support for my work, and I look forward to seeing you the next round. Thanks again, Larry. And yeah, thanks Cheryl for being here. Nicholas, thank you for coming. Jen, Drake, thank you for being here. Gay, thank you for coming. Doreen, thank you. Robin, thank you. Jill, thank you for coming and being here and showing up live. Nadine, thank you for coming. Karen, thank you. And I will see you hopefully soon.